From its inception in 1830, the Mormon Church, also known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, allowed people of all races to be baptized into church membership. However, for over 130 years, members of Black African descent were barred from ordination to the priesthood and from participating in certain temple rituals. It is important to understand that this issue is a very difficult and personal topic for many members of the Mormon Church. First, the context in which these issues emerged in Mormonism is important. From the time that African slavery began in 1619 in the Americas, it was a polarizing issue. Many Christians sought to excuse their participation in slavery by citing justifications in the Bible. They often used the biblical story of Cain for this purpose. And as the story goes, Cain murdered his brother and was cursed by God to become a homeless wanderer. When Cain complained to God that everyone that findeth me shall slay me, the Lord mercifully put a protective mark on Cain so that people wouldn't kill him when they found him. Over time, this story was condensed and distorted by some Christians to convey the idea that God cursed Cain with black skin, and that his posterity was, therefore, somehow deserving of enslavement. This narrative was strengthened further by similarly distorting the story of Noah when he cursed Ham's son Canaan to be, quote, a servant of servants. Over time, Canaan somehow came to be understood as a key ancestor of the Black African race, and his children were therefore understood to be divinely designated as servants or slaves. These interpretations of the Cain and Canaan stories are gross perversions of the actual biblical text. However, they were consistently used by Christians as divine justifications for the enslavement of Black Africans. Apologists for slave owners rationalized they were actually doing, quote, God's work by bringing a heathen people out of dark Africa, often captured by fellow Africans through tribal warfare, and brought them into a civilized, enlightened nation with and into the Christian faith tradition. They reasoned that even though they were enslaving these Black Africans, they were giving them Christianity and a better civilized life. During the Enlightenment, a period of scientific discovery beginning in the late 1600s, Europeans began to try to use science to prove the inferiority of Africans. However, only pseudo-scientific explanations could help them further justify the enslavement and unequal treatment of Black Africans. With these pseudo-scientific explanations in mind, and with an emerging understanding of genetics, people began to voice fears and concerns about interracial sexual relations and intermarriage. In fact, by the late 1800s, fears of race mixing led to laws banning interracial marriage in 38 U.S. states. Of course, there were always those who did not believe that the enslavement of Africans was moral or right, but this group was usually in the minority. Those who openly lobbied against slavery were called abolitionists. However, few who were against slavery believed in the equality of the races, and most were culturally repulsed by the thought of interracial mixing. Over time, a division among the British colonies in North America emerged between the North, where slavery existed on a small scale, and the South, where slaves were a significant part of the plantation economy. After becoming a nation, political divisions were drawn between slave-holding interests in the South and Northern mercantile interests. Throughout the first half of the 1800s, a careful balance of political power was maintained between the two factions. When new states were admitted to the Union, strident debates occurred to ensure there was no disruption to the balance of power between the two competing interests. When the Mormon Church was founded in 1830, there were roughly 2 million slaves in the United States, totaling 1/6 of the U.S. population. Joseph Smith and many early converts to the Mormon Church were from the North and were generally opposed to slavery. Many of these converts moved to Missouri in 1831, which was a slave state. Over the next 2 years, these converts were exposed to mob violence and forcibly removed from Jackson County, largely because the Missourians were concerned that free Black Mormons would congregate in Missouri, which would incite their slaves to rebellion, would disrupt the, quote, contentment their slaves lived under, and they would intermarry with the whites. Another major concern was that the Mormons, primarily Whigs, would upset the political balance of power between the Democrat Southerners. After suffering this treatment in Missouri, largely over the race issue, Mormon missionaries in the South were instructed not to proselyte slaves unless they had permission from their masters. To counter various claims that Latter-day Saints were abolitionists, a group viewed as extremists at the time, the church newspaper editors published some newspaper articles critical of abolitionism. During Joseph Smith's lifetime, there were no church policies excluding members with Black African ancestry or limiting their full participation in the church in any way, including priesthood ordination for men and temple worship for all. For example, in 1836, Elijah Abel was the first man of Black ancestry to be ordained to the priesthood, followed by Q. Walker Lewis in 1842-43. Brigham Young, the second president of the Mormon Church, said in 1847 that Lewis was, quote, one of the best elders in the church. The persecution the Mormons experienced in Missouri made them extremely gun-shy regarding politics as it related to slavery. After their final expulsion from Missouri in 1838 and 1839, Mormons were forced to move to Illinois. The people of Illinois, a non-slave state, welcomed the religious and political refugees from Missouri. The state legislature granted the new Mormon city called Nauvoo a charter allowing liberal self-government. In this setting, Joseph Smith began to voice his anti-slavery opinions more freely. When Smith ran for president in 1844, he proposed that slavery be abolished within 6 years and that slave owners be paid for their slaves by money raised through the sale of public lands and reducing the pay of members of Congress, a position not that different from Abraham Lincoln himself. Although by the end of his life, Smith clearly opposed slavery and was in favor of full Black African inclusion in the church, not every member of the church felt the same way. In the years following Smith's death, it became clear that some church members, including Mormon leader Brigham Young, held different beliefs than Smith. Young continued to express old Protestant ideas about Cain and Canaan to justify the institution of slavery and to bar Black African members of the church from priesthood and temple privileges. Young's statements in an 1852 convention of the Utah legislature run counter to earlier opinions in his life as he shared Smith's earlier Illinois-era views on race. What accounts for the shift? Some have reasoned that given the political circumstances of the time and the recent compromise of 1850, that Young desired to endear Southern sympathies towards Utah in allowing their admittance to the Union by permitting slavery in the territory. Young's views on race seem to have changed from his views in 1847, where he stated that Q. Walker Lewis, a Black man, was, quote, one of the best elders. Please like and subscribe. For more on Blacks in Mormonism and race in the priesthood, visit MormonismExplained.org. Thanks for watching.